This is Marty Wilson. I'm sitting here with Suzanne Urton in her home up here on, what street is this?
Green Tree Drive.
Green Tree Drive. It's about 1:06 Friday afternoon, July the 6th, and we're here to talk about Suzanne's experiences with Sterling Strauser, rather. So, Suzanne, let's start by, so that we have a record of it, who you are and how you knew Sterling, those kinds of things.
Okay, well, I've lived here most of my life. My parents had been here for a good part of their life. My father was a surgeon over at the General Hospital, and my parents joined an art group that Sterling Strauser was in, and they would go something like once a month, I think it was. I don't remember exactly how many times, but they would go at the evening and have these art courses, and there's a whole group of people that went. And how I sort of got involved with Sterling Strauser, or knew of him, was my mother and I were in front of Wyckoff's department store years ago, and he came by, and I was wearing a green jacket with fringe on it, and I had a red hat on with a rabbit.
And we can see that jacket and hat in this picture.
Right. And so he really liked that. He thought that was neat. And he had stopped my mother, and he was talking to my mother, and he asked my mother if I could pose for them at the art group. And so she said, okay. And so she took me over, and I don't remember now how many times I actually was there. I don't know if we did it all in one night or if it was done in 2 or 3 different nights.
Do you remember where?
It was above one of the buildings in Stroudsburg.
On Main Street?
Yeah, on Main Street, as I recall. That's where the art group met. And they'd all come in. Now, not everyone worked on this, on doing me. They could do other things. But Sterling and a couple other ones did me, and this other artist, which I'd have to...
So that's not a Sterling Strauser on the left?
No, that one, he was in the group, and they were all doing it, so they got different... different impressions.
And just for the record, you're describing the one where you're standing there with...
Right, that's an oil, or that's a pastel. Strauser's was oil.
It looks like you're sitting in the one with...
Not really. That's the way he
Okay, but it's from the waist up, essentially.
Right. And they gave me this basket, because they said, you can't now, just don't have her standing there. Give her something to hold. So they gave me this basket. I remember them doing that. And then they just said, they give you breaks, just like any model. So they would say, are you tired? Like, no, I'm okay. So they just went ahead and did did their paintings in whatever medium they were working in. And I remember my father coming home one time from this painting group and going, Sterling really liked my lines in this painting he was doing. Sterling was really into line. I don't see it as much in this, but I do see it in those paintings.
The flower and the one with the horses.
Yeah, he apparently went over, from what my father said, and just went on and on about, that's a great line, that line in that painting, that is really interesting, fabulous line. So he was really interested in lines.
Was he being a teacher in this thing, or was he just one of the other painters?
They were just help each other out. My father was never really, as my father said, when he went to high school, the art teacher sort of helped him through, because he said he never considered himself an artist. But from things I've heard and read, a lot of people that are in the medical profession do have a bent. There is something there, because I do have I have a degree in nursing, and I have my BSN. And I was back and forth between nursing and science, and I can see the tie-in. And I taught biology for a couple of years at parochial school, so I would draw all these things for the kids, and they're like, wow, So there is a tie in there. There's something about the arts and medicine, and as they say, medicine is an art. So
Have you pursued it? Are you an artist?
yeah,
Are you?
I'm actually a weaver and jewelry maker. So,
Ah.
and I teach art. I teach art to 6th and 7th grade students at East Stroudsburg School District.
Oh.
So yeah, so I can, and I'll help them with their work, but I can see things, especially the longer you're in it, and as you work on things, you can sort of see certain things that you didn't see years ago. Like sometimes when I look at paintings, I'm going, wow, okay, now I see what he's talking about. Because in that water one, see the line?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, because I never realized that until my father had come home and said that about the lines. And if you look in his paintings, some of those lines are actually accentuated. So it's very interesting. But he did things, from what I recall, in series. He did a baseball series. He did a series with his grandchildren, I believe. I know when we went over to his house, his wife was known for her pictures done with fabric. And the whole house was nothing but just stacks of paintings around. And then you just go through them. And then he'd say, well, you go, how much do you want for that one? $15, $10. And the other interesting thing, about 1967, 68, Tom Mann, who was a student over here at ESU, and he's also an artist, a jeweler and furniture maker. But he opened a shop here in East Stroudsburg, right next to the old Grand Theater, where that used to be, or where it is still, but they don't call it that anymore. And I worked with him for a while. I worked for him and with him because I did some of the jewelry for them. And that's how I got really involved in the jewelry making. So I had started there doing that, and Strauser used to come down and bring paintings and put them in the shop for him. He did musical instruments, and I think he had a musical instrument painting in there for Tom. And
The Manns had a health food store down there.
Right.
But this is different. This is separate.
This was a separate store. This Tom and another, and I don't remember the other fellow's name, he and another student from ESU opened this art store. And all it was the jewelry. They'd invite other artists to come in and leave things pretty much on commission or consignment. And Strauser put a couple of his paintings in, because he was always like, he would occasionally stop in, or if he stopped in and I wasn't there, somebody else was there, I wouldn't necessarily see him, but he had some pieces in there, and then there were other artists that put pieces in there. So Tom ran it. Then he moved it to the building near Medsco Glass that was I think it was the old hospital. That building, he had the art store in there, and his brother then started running the health food store.
Yeah.
Right.
So you mentioned that you went to Strauser's house. I mean, how did
Yeah,
that?
when my mother, I think my aunt had come down and wanted to get some paintings, and they went over. They called and asked if it would be okay to come over, and they went over, and I went with them. I used to go everywhere. I mean, my father was a collector. My father collected covers and flights over the polar regions, and he has a whole collection of books on the Arctic and Antarctic and Alaska.
So what was this house like? I mean, I'm getting this image that there were, like you sort of have here, these paintings everywhere.
Yeah, it's sort of like that. It's a little bit of everything. My mother we'd go antiquing and things like that. They'd go to auctions. We'd see something we liked. They would bid on it. We have another painting down in the living room that I'm pretty sure it's from the Hudson River School. I started to look it up and then got waylaid with so many other things. I never finished looking into it, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's a Hudson River School painting. It came from an old resort that was before the railroad tracks, as you're going up to Mount Pocono on Old 611. There used to be an old resort on the left-hand side, and I remember going to an auction there because they had some friends they knew that were in the antique business, but they would go and buy out estates. and they were down in Portland. And we used to go down there, and he had a big warehouse, and he just let my father go in, because my father was always willing to get any new books, and so that was my father's big thing. So we'd go in there, and we'd just go through, and then there used to be another place called 50,000 Books down in Tatamy, and that was fabulous. I loved going in there, because it was just a big mill, and all it was floor after floor of books.
So how old were you when these were done?
Probably about, I think I was probably around 12 when they did that.
So we're talking, what, 70s, late 60s? Or?
Oh, it must have been in the 60s, or maybe the late 50s. Maybe I might have been a little younger, too. I don't recall exactly.
Do you remember how it felt to see yourself, like when you walked around the easel and looked at the pictures?
It was sort of weird. I never really, I always thought Strauser's was a little strange looking, the eyes on it, because, it's like you don't really have eyes, per se, on that. They're not delineated. But I think I liked this other artist a little better when I was at that stage. But then I can see they're totally different paintings. They're totally different feelings about them.
How did you come to own these paintings?
As I said, I believe Strauser gave my parents that one, and I think the other artists also, after the art show that he was in, gave them that painting or that pastel also. Because I don't remember all of a sudden they had them, and there was like, oh. And then my mother had it hanging. Well, for years it's been hanging. And my rule of thumb to my mother, because she would take things and she'd stack them, and we've got paintings up in the attic and everything, and I'm like, Mom, the safest place for painting is on the wall. Because we have some that are old, but the glass got broken on them, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you can't do that.
So then how did these other three, now we're talking about the seascape and the horse race, it looks like, and
right.
The flowers. How did they come into the family?
Okay, I bought the race horses because I'm a horse person. I have horse, and I've always had horses since my parents got me my first horse. So the horse painting, I wanted that one, and I believe when we went to Strauser's house was when I got that one, because I know, if I remember correctly, my aunt bought a couple paintings that were long like that, she's a rhubarb. He did a series on vegetables and fruits, so she has a rhubarb, and she might have picked up a couple other ones there. And as I said before, she was an artist in her own right, so she painted, she was more of a portrait painter, and she worked for Vogue. She was an illustrator for Vogue magazine. And the flowers my mother got. My mother got the flower one. And then the water one, I'm not sure if she got that at Strauser's house or where that came from, but it seemed to go with my father's collection, and so she got it from my father. So that's where that one came from.
So your first experience was when you were whatever age that is,
Yeah,
10, 12, whatever.
Or somewhere in that age group.
But then did you go once a year or so to his house? Or?
No, it was sort of hit or miss. Like if my aunt came up and she wanted to go, my mother would go over. A lot of times they used to have an art exhibit in the summer at the courthouse square, and a lot of times they'd go over there and they'd walk through all the paintings, because I know they had some other ones from some other artists that were well known in the area. And my brother took one of those paintings. It was an ocean scene with like looking through rocks, those big rocks, and you can look through it and see the water. So he has that one, but it's not a Strauser. It was another artist that was well known in the area. And then Tom Mann lived in the house that, I can't think of her name, it just left me. She, I think she did something with dolls, and she was a well-known artist in the area. And
in South Stroudsburg?
No, he lived over here near Antelomic, before you get to Antelomic, where there's an old Stroud house near the dealerships, the auto dealerships. There's a road back in there, and you pass one of the Strauser houses. Well, if you continue back on that road, maybe not even a mile, there was another artist that had a home in there, and I can't think of her name. She passed away. I saw her obituary in the paper a number of years ago, but she was another one that she would have an open house at that house, and I remember going to that and going because my parents went, and going with my parents to the open house and going through, and she had all sorts of artworks and things in there. And then of course Dr. Jordan he was part of the group, because I know there's gosh, we have one of his paintings too. And then he did a book on his doodles, and then there was another man that was in that art group. I'm trying to think what his name was. I'm not sure, and I think we might even have one of his paintings, because the art group, I think they sort of swap paintings with one another. If they like stuff, they would say, "Oh, you can have it," type deal, because we've got paintings that are like from different people and every once in a while, like as I said, I'll go around and go, "Oh yeah, I remember that person." Like, I didn't go to the art group, their painting group, and it ran for a while, and then I don't know. Of course, my father was so busy over at the hospital that eventually he just didn't go anymore. But my mother painted. She'd take over.
What were your mother and father's names? I don't think we mentioned it.
Oh, my father was Dr. Morton Spinner, and my mother was Ruth Pexon Spinner.
I see.
So we have a lot of artists in our family, and then I've been doing some genealogy work and found out that my grandmother's brother was also in the arts, and he was also a podiatrist. So I think he was a photographer.
It's in the genes or something, I guess.
Yeah, it's something, because I have cousins that are artists. It's like, so I have a cousin that went to art school, and they all have that little bent to the arts.
Now I can see there's a name on there, but I can't read it from here. Do you know?
Yeah, and I can't read it either. It's Peter. Is it Mendler? MENDLERHER? Right?
Yeah, MENDLER, Mendler.
Something like
Peter
that.
Mendler.
Yeah, he was another artist around the area. There were lots of artists around here when I was growing up. It was
Well, what else can you tell me about Mr. Strauser?
pretty much that's about it. I never really was, my parents were more involved with him with the art group and that, and as I said, going over to his house and his when he would go over to Tom Mann's shop and that, the odd time I'd see him when he'd come in there. But then I went off to college, and I went up to Canada for a year up there and out to the University of Missouri. I did a lot of art related programs. I got my education degree in Canada, and then finally got my MFA up at Marywood. I think that was the last degree I got. So I have like 5 degrees, so I figured that's enough. I don't need any more than that. I toyed with getting my doctorate, but then I was teaching, and I said I couldn't. It's too much. You have to devote time to it. And
yes. So when's the last time you saw him? Do you remember that?
Oh gosh, it was years ago. Possibly when he came into Tom Mann's shop. It's probably about the last time, because then I was away. I wasn't around here, and it might have even been when my parents went over to his house, because they went a couple times, but I don't. When you're little, you don't remember all the times. And,
sure.
So it was a while, and then the next thing. Well, I knew I would follow different things in the paper with the arts, especially some of the artists around here. And I knew there was a gallery in Tennessee, I believe it was, that was looking into representing him for his artwork and selling it. And then not So I guess it wasn't maybe, I don't know how many years after that, the next thing I heard he had passed away.
Do you have any
Yeah.
impressions of him, when you met him, maybe as a little girl or maybe later in your life? What kind of guy he was?
Not so much that. No, not really. I don't remember because there's so many different people. Like when they did the painting, I just remember all these people, everybody was like painting and intent on what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And, other than the little things my father would mention when he would come back from from the group and then he'd mention something. But then I was not really around here for a number of years, and then I came back to the area. So when I came back, it was sort of like...
All right, well, it's a really interesting story, and that's a wonderful portrait. And didn't you tell me on the phone that he didn't normally do portraits?
Right. From what my parents told me, you're not going to find very many portraits. I think he did some of his grandchildren. And I think maybe his baseball series, if I remember correctly, because he had a couple of them hanging up in his house, and there might have been but I think they were his grandchildren that were in that. And then I've never heard of him doing it. In fact, one of my classmates when I was at college, when I first went off to college, and she found out that Strauser had done a portrait of me, she was really interested. She wanted to know if he would do one. She was sort of like, does he do them? And I said, I don't think so. I said, this just happened to be a group my parents were in years ago, and I said, and he did the portrait. But as far as I know, he did not do portraits. And I think if you look through his work, his body of work, I don't remember seeing any other, really any number of portraits.
Did you go to the show, by the way, that was...
No, I was teaching, and when I teach up there, I teach 4 in a row, and then I have a break, and then I teach the last 2 periods of the day by the time I got out of there and came back home. And I also take care of horses where I'm boarding, because with the economy the way it is, the girl that I board with has to go and work for a vet. She's a vet's assistant. So I go in and feed at night. So between all that and then coming back, and I have to be up around 5:15 in the morning to get to school, so it's sort of like, I had planned to go. I wrote it on the calendar. I said, oh, this would be really neat to go, and I just never got
Well, you'll have
there.
another opportunity, I think, right? They'll have a permanent display.
Yeah, that's what I understand, which would be nice, because it's something that's... it's interesting when you have an artist and then they get to have a permanent display of things. It's really sort of neat.
And I assume these are all going to Hamlin.
Yeah, I'm planning to take them. Now, my brothers haven't said anything. So I don't think they want my portrait, but they haven't said anything, and the one is mine, and the other 2, they already have their own households and everything. So for the most part, I will take them with me. My mother was going to get the flower one framed, but she never did. She kept saying she was going to do it and never did. And I was going to do eventually, and I should get the horses done. But that's as far as we got with it. But I think this one, Strauser sent it over with the frame on it. I don't remember my mother, although she might have had it framed. But I know that
How long did it take him to do that?
if I remember correctly, I was only there for either one time or for, I don't think it was any more than 2 or 3 times. So they worked pretty fast. And I think with his, it's more of an impression. The other artist, the one that did the pastel, is is a bit more detailed, but I don't know. They just worked when they got going. They were just, and they take breaks and things, but and they talk and they walk around and look at each other's work. I remember them doing that, but.
And that ribbon that's on there?
That's the award he got for the show. That has the white cup thing. My mother did have I think there must have been a newspaper clipping, but I don't know what happened to it that was on the back, because I can see where there was a strip, and heaven only knows what happened to that, but might be possible to figure out date-wise and go back in the Pocono record and find the article. because I do a lot of research, see, I would go back and look it up. I'd have to sit and read microfilm, but I hate reading microfilm. So, but I think I could probably go back, and it might even be on the computer, because I don't know how far back they've gone, Pocono Records gone with their things. But as I remember correctly, they used to publish the results, because I remember I put a piece of work in, because they had like a juniors section, and I put a piece of work in a couple of times in the Wyckoff Art Show. But that was the big show around here, was to go put something in that.
Where was it, back in the tea room?
Oh gosh, I think it was upstairs. Part of it was upstairs. It depended on the year they held it. And something tells me it was upstairs, because somehow I remember taking the elevator upstairs to go look at it. But Wyckoff's changed so much over the years, because it used to be 2 floors, and then they opened the basement, and Sears was in the basement of Wyckoff's department store. And then I remember my mother going over there, and they had like an annex on the side for the resorts, and you could go in there and buy like glassware, just tons of glassware and stuff and it was all set up basically for the resorts, because resorts would come in, they'd need glasses or pitchers or whatever. And I remember my mother going in there and buying a pitcher, because she said it was a stainless steel pitcher, and she said, "Oh, that's a really neat pitcher. That would be good to have," and she bought it. So, but it was like an annex off the side, and the floors were old wooden floors. But then after Wyckoff, after Papa Wyckoff passed away, now he had that whole section in there. Just before you would get to the back where they had the little lunch counter, there was a whole section in there that was like gift items, and he would go and buy all these objects, and he'd have them in there. Because I even have a wooden horse I bought in there. I saved up my money and got this wooden horse from Germany. It was all painted orange and different decorations all over it. But you'd go in there, and I think my mother has some plates she bought from his gift area. But he'd get these really unique things, and I think he'd travel, and then he'd just buy up stuff and then have them shipped. But he was like the last of the old way of doing things. Because I can remember going in, and when I was little, they still had things in like these bins, like it wasn't really a table, it was sort of like a table with dividers on it, and then the clothes were put in these bins or dividers, and it was totally different. And then it was, the big time was in the summer around here. Everybody was set up for the summer guests coming in, and then it was a resort area. Then there were tons of resorts around.
Yeah, a lot different back then. Not as many people around, right?
Exactly. And then winter, everything died.
Yeah.
Because I know students, a lot of the students I went to school with, their parents would hunt, and that was their meat for the winter.
No kidding.
No.
Now, you mentioned earlier that when your mom moved here, she couldn't find a house with a bathroom in it, or had a hard time. What year roughly was that?
I think it was after World War II when they moved
late
in
40s?
Here, late 40s, it'd probably be the late 40s. I don't think it was any later than 1950. And I know my father, my mother said they had to come in and interview for the position here at the hospital with Dr. Jordan, and then my father had to go to Harrisburg, I believe, to get his license, because he didn't have a Pennsylvania license. I think he was licensed New York, and then we lived in Ohio for a short period of time. He worked there after World War II, and then we came here. And then it was closer, because I can remember them driving on Old 46 to get to New York, and I was like, today you go down and it's like, and some of the places on it I can still remember. I can still remember. They haven't they've changed. There's no, but I can remember where they were, and they're still standing. That's probably the major thing. But up here, oh my goodness, this has changed so much. Before the road went through, we had log cabins up here, and there were 2 log houses, and then as people started moving in and buying up tracts of land up in here, then the log houses were sold or disappeared. The one that was over here where the road is, that one got taken out because the road went through that tract of land and just removed that one. And then the people that were living there had built, in the meantime, had built a house where the road is now too. The one thing I regretted about this road coming through, and it's really strange, but when we were little, there was a big tree. It was huge. And I remember all the neighbors' kids, we used to go and hold arms and go around the base of this tree. That tree must have been over 400 years old. That was
you know what kind of
huge.
tree it was?
It was either a maple or an oak, as I recall, but I don't remember exactly.
And
But
when
it just
Route 80
had
came
this,
through, they had to
they
cut it down.
took it down. And I thought, what a shame, because that thing must have, the history that tree must have seen. It's amazing.
Well, getting back to Sterling,
Yeah,
of course.
we
Is
can
there anything
do-
else I should have asked you about Sterling? Anything else you can think of about
Not
Sterling?
really. I don't, most of it is what my parents, a lot of it is what my parents would say when they come back from, their art thing. But I know my father was so impressed because he was like, well, he picked out my painting. It was like the lines.
So your father valued his opinion, apparently.
Yes, I think so. I think he felt that he was a true artist in that sense, and my father never considered himself an artist in that
I
sense.
see.
And so he was really neat. And then my mother and father had this little thing going. My mother would doctor my father's paintings and he'd get really upset.
She would doctor his painting?
Yes, she'd go in. She says, it needs something. And when she did it to one painting, she never did it to another one because he was so upset about. She said, you don't touch another person's work. But she went in and painted berries or something in his painting, and he was like, no, don't touch my. So that was sort of a bone of contention with him.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
All right, well then, you're going to let me take these.
Yes.
These are photographs of the pictures, and we have the one of you was standing as a little girl with the basket, and this is by this
That's
Peter.
by this Peter, whatever.
Whatever. And then we have the one of the flowers.
It looks like Nendler.
Mhm.
And he probably will show up somewhere because if I remember, now I don't know if he was one of the major artists around here or he just was part of the group, because the group, as I said, consisted of artists that were here and other just people in the community. It was not restricted to just artists.
Mhm.
So it was an interesting thing, and I don't even know to this day how long they stayed together. But I know for a while I know that my parents would go to whenever they were supposed to meet. They would go to the meeting, and so they'd all bring their painting stuff with them and paint. Everybody would be painting, or as I said, this man did it in pastels. Some of them would be sketching. They were all a little bit different.
All right, so then we have the one of the portrait, we have the one of the dog, the horse race.
All right.
That's a neat one. And this neat seascape.
All right.
I appreciate that. All right, so I'll turn the machine off.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks very much.